been there. Oh, there we go.
Here we
There we
go.
go.
We are live. So excellent. So I might start off just to introduce ourselves and the topic. But before we do kick off, I would like to start today by saying Wominjeka and Buderi Kamaru. Very simply put, Wominjeka means welcome in the language of the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and Buderi Kamaru means hello in the language of the Gadigal people of the Eroa Nation. These two nations are sometimes also known as Melbourne and Sydney, and these are the lands this panel and I are joining you from today. Before we move on, I do want to also pay our respects to the traditional owners of these lands, elders past, present, and emerging, and I'll also extend that respect to our First Nations people here today. And then also I want to briefly pause and reflect on what it means to acknowledge country. So today, the four of us are here to share stories, encourage inclusion, and build community. So let's reflect on the fact that storytelling, inclusion, and community building has happened on these lands for roughly 65,000 years before us. Even as recently as the Uluru Statement from the Heart, that was and still is a gift of inclusion for all of us to walk this journey together. So today, we're just simply builders upon this story. So to everyone joining the four of us, I say Wominjeka, Buderi Kamaru, and welcome to what should be an inspiring session on the business advantages of creating an inclusive culture. So very quickly, some housekeeping notes before we start. This event will be recorded. To the audience who's joining us, feel free to ask any questions, make comments at any time in the chat. We'd love to get your thoughts and questions, and we'll have time to answer them towards the end of the session. And then to kick things off, so I'm blessed to be hosting this conversation with an amazing panel made up of Sandra Lim, Nicole Harlow, and Tash Johnson. We're also supported in the background by Amy Newell from Striven. My name is Deepak. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a first-generation migrant and also a dad to two little hurricanes. Professionally, I'm a people experience leader. I love my work and I'm a member of Striven, who have been kind enough to host this session today and host some really exciting events in the lead up to International Women's Day next week. So be sure to check them out. So before I really introduce our panel and get them to introduce themselves, I should say, I do want to introduce the topic. What is the business advantage of creating an inclusive culture? In a world where binary outcomes seem to be more prevalent, inclusion increasingly becomes a critical driver to break those biases and tangibly drive organizational success. We're seeing the immediate, I guess we're all seeing the needed effects of transparency on gender pay gaps in Australia. So imagine that impact in a year or 5 years. So the conversation today is not really about convincing our audience of the importance of inclusion. It's about empowering and motivating you to lead the charge to drive meaningful change within your respective spheres of influence. So as forward-thinking leaders, it's imperative we not only recognize the significance of inclusivity, but actively champion it. Let's harness its transformative power to unlock the potential of our teams and our organizations. Together, let's take a journey to cultivate environments where every individual feels valued, respected, and empowered to thrive. When we thrive as individuals, we thrive as teams, businesses, and communities. So once again, Wominjeka and Buderi Kamaru, let's have these amazing people sitting next to me introduce themselves. So Sandra, Nicole, and Tash, and hopefully you're happy to do that in that order. Do you mind introducing yourselves and sharing a little bit about yourselves?
Lovely. Thank you, Deepak, and thank you for such a wonderful introduction. To everyone, my name is Sandra Lim, also known as Slim, also known as Ihua Lim. I obviously am not a first-generation Australian. I am a migrant, and I have come over here from Malaysia, which I call home. So I've been here for equal amounts of time, half my life in Australia and half of my life in Malaysia. So I feel like I've grown up here quite a bit, learned a lot about the culture, and also imparted a lot of my own culture into everywhere that I go, into all the different communities and work. I am currently the head of talent at a government organisation called the SEC, and we are really focused on target emission zero by 2035. So we're really focused on making us Victoria into a renewables energy focused state. But my background and my culture, I thought it would be a really fun fact to share that my name, Ihua, loosely translates to love culture. in English. Yeah, so I think it's made, or I was born for, a role within people and culture to work in, given that my name roughly translates to that as well. But I'm really big on inclusion. I'm really big on everything that's part of the diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging component. So that's me today. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. Nicole, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks so much, Deepak. My name's Nicole. I am the founder of the Digital Talent Lab. I took the leap of launching the business about 6 months ago now. So I'm an entrepreneur. I love recruitment. So I help businesses find great people across the digital and marketing space, which I also love. I'm an avid social media stalker and lurker of everything. I go down the TikTok rabbit hole daily. I'm also the founder of The Career Architect. So I work with people one-on-one to help them build and grow their careers as well. I love people. So recruitment is a natural space for me to be in. I'm that girl at a party that is asking you what you do, why you do it, who do you know, and all that sort of thing. So I'm a natural connector. A lot of what I do is it's almost matchmaking. So asking people, do you know Sandra, or do you know Tash, and introducing them to each other. So I love networking and bringing people together. So recruitment's a natural fit for me. I'm big on inclusion and diversity. I have a hidden disability. I'm turning 50 this year, and I'm a stage 4 cancer survivor. So all of those things have come together to make me really aware of diversity and inclusion, and looking at ways in which I can help businesses move the dial on that through both their people and their leadership teams. So that's me. Really pleased to be here.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for sharing that. And last but not least, Tash.
And hi, welcome everybody. My name's Tash Johnston, and I've been in recruitment for over 20 years now. It's really scary to say that out loud. And I really I started working out with long-term unemployed people, and it resonated with me because my dad was a stay-home dad, and my mum went and had the power career with big shoulder pads back in the late 80s, early 90s. And when he wanted to get back into work around my age, in his mid-40s, he really struggled to get back in and people to take him seriously. So from then, I've just had a fascination about the recruitment process and how you can really include people in that process and get really great people that often aren't what everyone expects through the recruitment process. And I've been lucky enough to work for big federal government organisations, state government, in the health space, non-for-profit, and utilities and construction. So I've seen a big movement through all of those areas about what success looks like, what doesn't always look like, and doing some really out there thinking and some strategic thought on doing that. I've just recently taken a career break and reopened my own business, Strategic Leap, which I actually originally opened when I had my third child a few years ago, 8 years ago. So I'm excited to be back in the consulting space.
Amazing. Thank you, well, all three of you, for those warm and personal introductions. And more importantly, I think sharing some vulnerabilities, which are strengths in themselves. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Before we do go into sort of some questions for the three of you, I just wanted to say that I had the pleasure of joining the three of you on a call earlier this week, and that I guess the powerful dynamic and energy that came from seeing each of us layering thoughts upon one another was amazing. So I really want to build on that today. And even before this call started today, we already started that. So it should be a really fun conversation. So to start with, let's go around the room, I think would be best. And I'd love to get each of your thoughts on this one. We all know that having an inclusive culture brings real business advantages. But what are some of the specific advantages or benefits you've seen within your business? Maybe let's go around backwards this time. So Tash, do you want to start with what are some of the specific advantages or benefits you've seen within business?
I think a lot of that is the ability to belong to an organisation. So the more that an organisation can talk about inclusion and put in different day-to-day implementations to make people feel included, so that might be talking about what their version of flexibility is, putting in policies that work to the different cultures that are working in their organisation, or having activities where people are able to talk through their own experiences. It really makes people feel welcome, it makes them feel that they belong, and it helps them connect. And then from that, they're having a positive experience at work, and then they're really great at them bringing in really great talent into your organisation. And when we all know when we're in a good flow and we're happy and not feeling lonely, that we produce our best work. And then that's when business gets to succeed in having their talent work to their best and perform at their best.
It's so true. It's so true. If you are happy doing what you're doing, you do it well. So thank you for that. Nicole, did you have anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I agree. I think happy people do great work, but I think about two things when it comes to what the impact of having an inclusive culture is. And for me, it's retention. It's the good people that love what they do, where they're doing it, they stay. And also productivity. So when you see like a really great team that's all singing from the same sheet, like it just goes through the roof. They're happy, they produce good work, and they stay within a business. So for me, it's those two things directly related to the bottom line and revenue. You can't get any more greater business impact than those two things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well said. And Sandra, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I feel both Nicole and Tash has hit that nail on the head, really. And I always see inclusion as not something as isolated. It's always, tied to a feeling of belonging as well. So that's why I'm always a big proponent of, it's not just DEI, it's DEIB. Inclusion and belonging comes together as a package. If people feel more inclusive, they feel that they belong more within the team, the department, the organization. And when you have a strong, cohesive, inclusive, and belonging culture, that drives engagement, and to Nicole's and Tash point, it drives productivity, it drives happiness, it drives curiosity, it drives problem solving, all the things that make an organization thrive. So yeah.
Awesome. My takeaway from all three of your comments is really, it's not another thing that we do, but part of what we do. And I love the real examples of how it does create an advantage. So thank you. So then the next question, I will start with you, Sandra. Knowing that you're leading the growth of a startup in a new function within the Victorian government, and been dealing with, I guess, process this morning, or some of the things that come from maybe not having a certain process fully defined and people jumping the gun. Let's put it to put it nicely. But then if Nicole or Tash, you want to jump in after that and just add anything to it, it would be amazing. But Sandra, how do you think hiring policies and inclusive culture are helping you to find, attract, and keep your top tier talent?
That's such a good question. I've been thinking about this for such a long time, because I could give you a really standard answer and say, yep, we embed it into our policy. It's a one-liner that we've written in there. But that's just a tick box exercise, isn't it? For me, and why I'm really proud and really happy about where I am currently working is it's literally a behavior and a way of culture that is, where people do talk the talk and walk the walk, from our CEO to our C-suite leadership team to any one of the individual contributors that I work with. So we are always talking about inclusion. We're always talking about ways of working. We're always talking about the great culture that we have, to the point where I myself sometimes, forget, and I do get challenged by hiring managers and the C-suite going, but what have you done to bring more of that inclusion into? So it's not that that P&C should be accountable. It's everyone in the business, from CEO to C-suite, and it's just something that we have to keep reminding ourselves. Things that we have to always keep at the forefront. We can't make assumptions that everyone feels and will do the way, or do the things that we want them to do, and bring it on. So it's more than just the policy. It's in the conversations that we have at our job briefings. It's in the conversations that we have at the briefing before the interview panel steps in. It's the conversations that we bring up again at the debriefing post interviews, through to the offer. Are we really bringing in the right people, and what are the steps that we can back ourselves in along the way, that we have provided the right information, the right policies. We've gone out to the market and we've said the right things. Are we being truly inclusive? So that's kind of what we've done.
Love it. Thanks, Sandra. That key point about policy being important, but if it's not embedded, it means little. So thank you. Nicole, Tash, did you want to add anything or jump in?
I like the awareness thing. Oh, sorry, Tash, but I like how you said about the awareness, because I think that a lot of businesses don't even have it on their radar. Certainly, I mean, I've got the advantage, I guess, of being an external talent supplier, working with a lot of different businesses, from everyone that has absolutely everything polished, policies in place, to businesses that don't even know what inclusion means and how much they are not having it at the forefront of their business. I like that. I mean, having that, I like that assumptions, you know, what they say about making assumptions. I think that tale is very true. So I like to see businesses that are training people when they're interviewing as well. There's a lot of, you know, people that do the interview process. They have absolutely no idea of the way that they either structure a sentence or ask a particular question. Could be showing that this business isn't that inclusive or doesn't have diversity on their radar at all. So that, for me, sort of the biggest one around process is making sure that your people know what your strategy and what your thoughts around diversity and inclusion actually are.
Love it. Thank
and
you.
I'd just like to follow that up on, it's an enormous task and it can seem like a huge lot of work for people to do. And I do think it comes into then conversations with middle management, and it just becomes too overwhelming to do the task. And what I've seen that works particularly well is that if there's an understanding on the different areas across the business, whether it's procurement, IT, it's just not HR by itself, that you're talking about the projects that you're all working on together, and at what steps along the way that you can start inserting and embedding those processes to then make it effective. And then maybe talking about, okay, we're going to start a focus in this area or that area. So then it becomes bite-sized and there's a step-by-step to do it, rather than a whole list of tasks that's thrown to IT area or to HR to try and achieve, and then trying to beg the different areas to implement that when they're really too busy. But if there's that more arching strategic approach where you're also then getting feedback from those different areas about how you can do that process and what's not going to work, or why not, if they need more resources or budgets to effectively do that, then you actually got the ability to deliver. Where otherwise you just got people coming to a meeting every month saying, oh, we haven't done that because we were too busy. So I think that's a really important step in the process.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump back in quickly as well. Sorry, Deepak, as well. From there, I think by nature of being a startup, you know, we don't have a lot of people in our organization at the moment, and we are in the scale up journey and we're getting there. But by the nature of being a very small business at the moment, is that we have people sitting in on panels that are not necessarily from that same department, just because we don't have enough people in that one department. So by chance, we find ourselves having a more inclusive panel already, that's got a good mix and variety of people from within the business. So when a new person comes in, you know, they're already meeting people from different departments, different areas. They've got a true picture of what that brings. And I try and reflect that in larger organizations as well. Sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's easier, but by nature, from being a startup, I feel like that's something that's actually really helped us out in this space.
Amazing. Thank you. I fully agree with all those comments. If I think of business, the customer journey is everyone's responsibility. So is our people's journey and their experiences and the culture of the business. Yes, a lot of our titles have people and culture in it, but culture is everyone's responsibility. Unless we all take it on, nothing happens. So love it. Thank you. This time, Nicole, I'm actually going to start with you on this question. So as the founder of your own consultancy in the talent space, I'd really love to get your thoughts on why, we know that, well, let me try and rephrase that. We know how important our leaders are in ensuring the culture we design is actually lived. How have you gone about educating managers on the importance of inclusivity? And then how have you gone about creating more inclusive leadership in the organizations you've worked in?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'll address it to the organizations that I work with, because often as a being able to be someone on the outside, I can probably give them some maybe different advice to what I would if I was working with them day in and day out. But as I mentioned before, sort of having inclusiveness and diversity on their radar, thinking about what their leadership teams look like as leaders, how are they walking the walk, and being able to talk about inclusivity. I think sometimes we get a little bit too caught up, like Tash said, in the scale of what implementing inclusion could look like. And at the end of the day, I think you just need to be promoting an inclusive culture, even just day by day. And I've worked in some incredible businesses where everyone has felt like part of a team. And I've worked in other businesses where it just hasn't been like that. Either there was a group of same, so everyone looked similar and came from similar backgrounds. And I think that often leads to the opposite of inclusion. So I like to work with business about thinking about if they've got a vacancy, let's not hire necessarily like for like. Is this an opportunity to look at someone different from a different walks of life, and how educated they are going into that process of recruiting in what a diverse group would look like for their business. What value add is it going to be? Because I know when you don't, I'm actually going through this at the moment, a new, I guess someone that was very different to everyone else within the business has come in, and they're really not enjoying it because the business hasn't taken that next step in ensuring they're included in everything. Once they've sort of, at 60, 70 day mark now, they're not sort of feeling included. And I can see they're not loving their job. The output's not there. It's just a really interesting situation.
I think that's a really good point on that. Where I've seen it work really successfully is, I was doing a lot of interviews with hiring managers, and I noticed they had unconscious bias for things like the degree a candidate was coming from. So they tended to choose people that went to the same university as they did, or they felt that a team sport was rowing. So they would tend to veer towards rowing if it was in your resume as the go-to for shortlisting and then interviewing candidates, which I found kind of fascinating. And then it led to it often led to hiring male candidates, which we had noticed at that organisation, that women tended to be in admin roles in that organisation at the time. And what helped make that big change is that we went through an awareness journey, and we did training together. So we didn't just say bad hiring managers go and do some unconscious bias training. We went and did unconscious bias training as a HR team with with hiring managers across the business and other different areas. And we talked about we made it safe to talk about when we recognised that we were being unconscious, because we all are. And so when we're in the midst of an interview, or we could see something was happening in the business, we were able to go, hey, I kind of noticed that this happened in that situation. Do you think that you might be a little bit biased in this situation? And people were able to challenge themselves and turn things around, and it really, in a positive way. So then they were recognising it themselves, and then going, oh, actually, this person's come from a different organisation. They don't have an Australian experience, but I think that's going to be okay for this project. Let's give it a go, and then we'll make sure that part of the performance process, we've got opportunities if things don't go right. And then we're asking different kinds of questions so we can make sure we welcome and include them into our organisation. And that business completely changed around by making it safe for people to recognise their unconscious bias.
Thank you. Sandra?
Look, I think both Tash and Nicole have mentioned this as well, but it is so important to have that culture of trust and belief to what you do. So, and that's really it. When you're out there, you're speaking to your stakeholders. I think being really open and honest with them, from a place of it's okay. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to have biasness, and I like to always share some of my hidden biasness with them as well. It's not the best test out there, but the Harvard implicit test is always a good starting conversation. Have you done this test? I've come up with, this is some of my biasness that I have, which to everyone here, I'm very happy to share. I'm really biased against middle-aged white men. That's how my Harvard implicit bias has shown up, which, surprises at all, given I've come from a very male-dominated industry that's all just full of middle-aged white men. But it's really sharing with them, being really open and being really transparent, and then having a conversation with them either before or after those interviews where you've noticed some behaviors, and just say, hey, by the way, I've noticed you've done X, Y, Z, and has anyone said that to you before? Why did you say this when you could have said that? And being really conscious of embedding culture add questions or values add questions into the interview process, and trying to explain to managers and stakeholders the differences between a culture fit and culture add. We don't want to hire another one of you. We want to hire people who are slightly different, or come with different diversity of thought and thinking and background. So I think that's been really important and quite successful as well, where I've seen it work.
Yeah, I like that. We did a particular organisation. We did DISC assessment, which seems off topic, but what it did was it didn't mean that you got hired based off your DISC. We were able just to then understand where you were on the DISC. I don't know if people know it, where it talks about that you're high attention to detail, that you're supportive, or you're quite direct. And I think that the I is more like you get distracted really easily and you're off with the butterflies now and then. So what we were able to do with that is talk it through. So we noticed that some of the team had whole teams of high attention to detail people, but what they realised was that they weren't connecting well with the rest of the business. And when they challenged themselves to bring in people from different areas of the DISC, they started to see how it flourished, because when they had to go and present to the government, they would send the person that was better at talking and networking. But they also recognised their attention to detail wasn't great, so they made sure a different part of the team checked their presentation for spelling mistakes and things like that before they went up. But then that also, again, opened a conversation about, okay, what is the introverts and extroverts kind of ratio in our organisation? What is our skill set of design versus implementation, or actually built form? So then it again brought up that diverse experience, so you weren't having clones of what was already there coming into the organisation. And then that also created diversity in gender, cultural backgrounds and schooling, and then created this really great environment.
I love that.
Yeah. I think for me, and what I've just taken away from what you've all fantastically sort of layered, is that the greater the sum of our differences, the better we represent not just society, but our customer. And that's what we're trying to do here. So thank you for that. Now, Tash, I'm going to put you on the spot this time, seeing that I am going around the room. So knowing that you have a knack of, I guess, undoing a bit of a mess and helping businesses to deliver their value, what advice do you have, knowing that we are all under pressure to track and measure effectiveness of our programs, I guess, and how do you measure and track the effectiveness of inclusive initiatives or inclusion initiatives? Oh, Tash, I think you just put yourself on mute. Sorry.
Always somebody has to say you're on mute. Yeah, I think data is such a fascinating one, but it also can be a really scary one too. But I also find it fascinating when organisations want to go in and they declare different strategies, but they don't actually know their data or baseline to start with. So for me, I think it's really important for declaring what a strategy is or what we're going to do is to have a baseline of what's actually happening into the business, so you can actually understand it. And then throughout the employee experience, and I guess the part that I mainly work on is from the attraction, and I love it, to every part of when you're viewing an ad right through until people are hired, about what that looks like and whether there's opportunities to put that through your ATS or recruitment system. But I love feedback. So I think there's a really important part about getting surveys throughout that system. So I like the Circle Back initiative and benchmarking, shout out to Steve, that it's really effective to see what's happening in the process. And I encourage candidates to put the feedback in there, because otherwise sometimes when you're doing mass volume recruitment and you're not in every interview, you don't know what's actually happening. So to be able to get that feedback about what is happening through the process, but also then being able to then look at the data and be able to communicate a story to the executive and leadership team about what's happening, but not being scared about that figure, about, some of the pay gap figures are pretty scary that are out there, but at least we've got a figure and something to work with, where we're pretty blind before about what was happening. And then we can start putting together strategies with that data and then talking it through. And it's not going to be, you could present data month by month, but you're not going to see that massive change. And you can trial things along the way, and sometimes they're going to be successful and sometimes they're not. But it's the only way to touch and feel the change and actually see whether there's success or not. And I've also seen that you've got to make it safe for people to answer those questions. So they've got to make sure that the language that's used and that you're talking to the business and the employees, that information is safely going to be used to help and support, encourage them to be okay in the business. Because if they don't feel that, they feel like it's going to be used against it, and they just don't fill in that information. But yeah, I'm a big fan. I'd love to hear what Sandra or Nicole has to say about it.
I love the survey idea. I actually had that when I was preparing the notes for it. I think surveying your people, not just even in the hiring, but throughout, like I'd be doing 2 surveys a year, right? How happy are our people? I think that's going to be a key, even if it's anonymous, right? So people can choose, but just sort of gauging what's the wellness like of the people within your business. I also think, for me, a key indicator of whether it's working, like I said at the beginning, is retention. Are people staying in your business? Because if they're feeling included, I did a LinkedIn post actually about how businesses, like marketers, are attracting people by, inclusion actually. So, like when those Coke cans came out with your name on it, everyone wanted it. And yet at school, you have your name on the back of a jersey or a football jersey. So I think inclusion is actually everywhere, and looking at the stickiness of a business, that's how I'd be measuring it. And also like referrals. So saying to a business, are people referring their family and friends to come and work for you? If you're not getting referrals in your business, then I would suggest something is wrong. So I'd be looking at how many people are actually referring people as to come and join, not to buy, but that's always one thing, but to come and join a business. So for me, surveys, retention, referral rates, that's how I'd be measuring how inclusive your business was.
I love it. I don't think I've got anything to add to that. I mean, it's definitely, the measurements around the inclusivity is through retention, through surveys, as you said. And it's funny because we were just talking about doing pulse surveys. How often we do them? Do we do them monthly? Will we get people having survey fatigues? How do we fit that into the information? How do we share that back to the executive leadership team? Because they've got an idea of what inclusion is, and the people have got an idea of what inclusion is, and sometimes it's a disconnect because nobody feeds the information back together to both parties. But it's also the takeaway from the results of these engagement surveys and the pulse surveys. All of it is, what are some of the key projects or successful programs that have come out of those comments and feedback? The employees need to see something being done, because there's no point asking all these questions and people saying, oh, if you did this, or because I feel this way, and then nothing's being done. They kind of go, what's the point of doing the surveys if no action's being taken, there is no programs being taken? Oh yes, we have said we would love more cultural days. That doesn't mean we want you to bring food in to celebrate the different cultures. It's a little bit more than that. It's not just cupcakes, purple cupcakes next week, everyone. Love Purple Cupcake Week, because that's all International Women's Day is about, right? It's throwing a big party and having purple cupcakes. No, it's about more than that. What are we doing for the business? What are we doing to support and champion the different diversity groups, and being included and inclusive in that space? I kind of like to see the traction post the surveys, and what are the successful programs that come out of it.
Amazing. Thank you. I love that all 3 of you have talked about not just data, but that quantitative and qualitative data. So not just pointing us in a direction, but getting the truth behind that direction or that where it's pointing. And I think also that's how you actually win hearts and minds with the big data, but the real stories behind it. But more, just as importantly, everyone talked about action. The data is important, but unless you do something with it, nothing happens. So thank you for that. Now, I am conscious of time, but I do have one more question. So I might just go around the group, if you don't mind. So before we wrap up and before we get any questions from the audience, so firstly, I will encourage, if you do have any questions, please type it into the chat. We will get through them. But for the three of you, if everyone had one thing to take away from today's session, what would it be?
I can go first.
Sorry, I should have done that.
We're all waiting patiently. That's unlike us. So I think that it's about what your personal contribution is around inclusiveness too. Like, I think it's one thing to ask the leadership of it, but it's all like, what is my part to play in how I'm creating or helping to create an inclusive and diverse culture within my business? So if you sort of see it and say it. And I also think it's about standing up for what your own requirements might be within a business from inclusion. And I guess that's what Tash was sort of referring to about having that safe space, but also if you've got it and you've got the ability to talk about it, then to raise it, be sort of that voice in the room that a business might need. So that's, for me, it still comes down to that individual level.
Love it. Thank you, Nicole. Sandra, you're not on mute, so you can jump in next.
I think for me is just to really highlight that we're all on different parts of the journey, in implementing these programs and where we're at and how we measure and how we've been successful or not successful. And it can get quite overwhelming sometimes when you're looking at the full trajectory of DE&I, inclusion and belonging, all the things that you must do and have to do. So I think it's just reminding yourself to take a step back. The fact that you're even thinking about it, it's a step in a positive direction. And to just break it down in chunks. You don't have to do everything today. You don't have to implement all the amazing programs you've heard about today. Just breaking them in chunks and doing what you can and what's fit for purpose for the organization and for the size of your team. Let's be realistic about it. If you're a one-person P&C person and it's a small business, you're probably not going to be able to do too much. But if you're wider, delegate and diversify. It doesn't also have to just all be within P&C. As I said before, you can spin up groups, women in tech and women in energy or whatever, different groups of how people can come and help you. And you'd be surprised. There'll be a lot of people that's really interested and they just don't know where to start and they're hoping for someone to start and you could be the starter.
Thank you. And then Tash, maybe to round this off.
Yeah, sure. So I just believe it's a journey. It can't just happen tomorrow. There's no big laundry list that you could sit there tomorrow and make those actions happen. It's small little actions that happen every day. And it's a change management journey. So working through the awareness and then making it safe for them people to desire to be part of that change, and then taking daily actions towards that change, and then measuring it so you can see where you came from and the successes and celebrate those successes along the way, because it's really exciting. It's such a great journey, and it's just amazing what can be achieved. And being part of a really diverse and inclusive environment, you just want to come into work every day and people just want to recommend that you're a great place to work. So it's just an exciting journey to go on.
Thank you. They're good points. It's yes, it is about an end goal, but the journey towards that end goal is just as important, and it's not an overnight journey. And one thing I think I wanted to add that I just got from listening to the three of you, and maybe back to that point on bias, but also privilege as well. All of us have some sort of privilege, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yes, we normally shy away from the term privilege or bias and things like that, but we can own it and use it. It's power. Privilege is power, and simply put, we can use it for good. I'm a male. As I said, my pronouns are he, him. I know I've got a lot of advantage. I know that by sounding the same as a lot of people out there, especially in Australia, I've got a lot of advantage. Having the role I have, I've got a lot of advantage. It gives me that opportunity to use that, hopefully for good, rather than shying away and pretending like I don't have some sort of privilege. So, yeah, thank you for maybe enlightening me on that as well. So I appreciate
think that's
that.
everyone's got the opportunity to create other opportunities for people around them. I think that's a really great point.
Yeah, definitely. Now I do see a few comments in the chat, but I do want to. Amy, who is supporting us in the background, part of the Striving team, did mention something about bias and inclusivity and the fear of saying the wrong thing. Maybe just a quick point as what have you seen work in helping make a safe environment for people to speak up?
That's a good question. I'm not sure where I've seen it happen. I guess I've probably seen it where it hasn't happened, but I think actually I've worked with some people before that have, I guess, been quite vocal about their vulnerabilities as well. I think in a larger organization, it's somewhat easier because you have different hiding spots. When you're in a business of 10 and, you're talking about, what the outcomes of surveys and things like that people can usually, or they try and deduce who said it. In a big organization, they don't bother so much. So I think it's important to think about if you're running a small business or you have a small team, that you can still be doing a lot of these things, right? You can still be asking your people things, but you've got to show that vulnerability a little bit yourself. I'm a big fan of that word vulnerability. My husband hates it. So I'm just like, lean in, honey, lean in.
I think it's a really good point, and all three of you have been very open and very vulnerable in some of the especially those intros and what you've shared. And I think all of that sort of circles back. So I agree.
I think it's about having questions throughout your experience where you can talk that through. So when I'm interviewing candidates, I'll talk about what will make their environment feel safe and that they'll belong. And then when I'm doing performance reviews as well, I'm talking about, or having a catch up, talking about how we can make the environment that people are working in flexible for them. So my bias with flexibility is I'm a mum of 3 girls, ranging from 8 to 18. So flexibility means to me that I'm a parent and I want to do school pickup, and I can be biased to think that I only deserve that flexibility. But what I've seen work really well is if you bring that flexibility right across a business and say, what does flexibility mean to you? So you might be a dad and you want to do school pickup. You might be really into the gym and you want to do an extra long session and come into work at 9, or you are a coach of a basketball team and you want to leave at 4. So that flexibility. So making sure that that flexibility is diverse in itself and meets what the different team members have really just opens up that conversation and then creates opportunities about what other things people might need to make it a safe environment for them.
Love it. Thank you. Now I've got one question just come in from Ian, and nice to see you again. It's been a little while. If we can do it quickly, let's try to, but also I would suggest, Ian, reach out to any of us as well. You are more than welcome to. I know all of us are quite open, but just to read it out to the team here, and if anyone wants to quickly jump in, how do you see lived experience and how important is it or in significance in comparison with other more commonly used measures such as qualifications, education, skills, etc. in the workplace? So lived experience, I guess, versus, what you see on paper.
I guess I'll jump in that because I've just come from the community health environment, and lived experience for different jobs can be a really important part of a person's role and understanding where they're coming from. And like we're saying, making sure that people feel safe and to be able to share their vulnerability with customers. So if you're working in domestic violence and somebody has that experience that they can actually understand, because sometimes it can people can be judgmental for people that have had experience with domestic violence or other different areas, or they've come from a disability, that you've got that person that actually understands the extreme experience that people are coming from and able to add that to an organisation. And then if you want to flip it to a different version of qualifications versus experience, I think you're seeing a lot of advertising now where people are saying that you have this particular qualification or equal to experience, and people are more open to that where it's appropriate. Like if you're needing an engineering degree or a doctor to be a doctor, then that's their experience. But if you bring 20 years experience in a particular area that's equal to the qualification, I think that's really important, that's fairly measured, that you can demonstrate in an interview and in your job that you can do that role equally as well.
I definitely see it very role dependent and industry dependent as well, because to your point, Tash, if it's a role that requires qualification as, you know, a medical degree or a law degree, or you know, having specific licenses to be able to do the job, unfortunately those trump you know, lived experiences, because I'm not sure if there's any non qualified doctors practicing as doctors, but you know, there's a word for them. But yeah, so it's definitely that. But then, you know, to that point that we made earlier as well, one of us did. I always get very annoyed where people go, "Oh, they're not successful for this job because they don't have Australian experience." Because to me, that's you know, what, how can you signify an Australian experience is any different from an experience in China or India or Europe or somewhere else? What do they actually mean by that? And one of my pet peeves at the moment is where people put, you know, numbers of years experience in doing X in a job ad. They must have 10 years experience doing this, and it's really drilling down with the managers, going, why? What do you mean about 10 years experience? How do you quantify it? Why is it not 7? Why is it not 15? How do you arrive to 10? There is no science to how
I'm hearing someone else say that. I feel like I'm the
there's
person
no science
constantly going,
that number.
what's 3? What is 3 the magic number?
Exactly.
I think we've just opened up another can of worms.
I will stop.
I do know we're actually pretty much on time, so I will wrap up today's conversation. But at the same time, before that, I just want to firstly say thank you to Strivin and also Amy, who's been helping us in the background, firstly for hosting this, but putting on a range of amazing events, not just including today, well, hopefully today, but what's coming up over the next few weeks as well. And a huge thank you to the three of you. So Sandra, Nicole, Tash, thank you, not just for your time today, but in the lead up to this. I've gotten so much out of it. And I, once again, really appreciate the vulnerabilities you shared and the trust you've shared to share those. It is great joining you. It's great to be a part of the conversation. But before closing up, I also want to come back to how we started this conversation. So very simply, it's all up to all of us to commit to being, I guess, architects of change within our spheres of influence. The personal experiences shared by the three of you really has provided some invaluable practical advice to foster inclusivity. And I've been taking notes furiously throughout. You might have seen me with my head down at times. So really, it's up to all of us to harness this knowledge, take these actions forward, and create environments where inclusivity is celebrated, but also integrated. We all have a choice to either be passive observers or active catalysts for transformation. We have the power to drive tangible and lasting change. When we thrive as individuals, we thrive as teams, we thrive as businesses, and we thrive as communities. Simply great outcomes for the business through our great outcomes for our people. Thank you to the three of you, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks, Deepak.
Thanks, team.
Thanks, everyone.